Since you hit play on Wife Teacher Mommy, the podcast today, I want to make sure that you know that our free self-love challenge is happening in February 2024 right here on the podcast. The goal of this challenge is to make creating an intentional practice of self-love even easier than ever simply by plugging in your earbuds and listening for about 10 minutes per day. But for the full experience, you're going to want to get the scorecard so you can enter the giveaways, get the daily journal prompts sent to your inbox, and join us for the live wrap-up podcast recording. Yes, you get to join me in the studio and record the podcast together live. It is all free. Go to wifeteachermommy.com/self-love challenge to sign up. Again, it is completely free. You'll get a daily reminder with the free 10-minute coaching each day and your journal prompt, and you will see a transformation over these 14 days. It is not only going to impact your relationship with yourself, but as I'll teach during the challenge, it is going to impact every single other relationship you have in your life, your relationship with other people, your relationship with teaching. That energy is going to impact every single other aspect of your life. So sign up at wifeteachermommy.com/self-love challenge. It's free. Now let's get to the episode. You are listening to episode number 107 of Wife Teacher Mommy, the podcast, all or nothing thinking and overgeneralization. Did you know that your brain is sometimes tricking you? Today is the first of 2 episodes where we're going to be talking all about this. And if you ever find yourself using the words always or never, you're really going to find this one interesting. Welcome to Wife Teacher Mommy, the podcast. I'm Kelsey Sorensen, a former elementary teacher and current homeschool mom. And even though I've been a resource creator since 2014, I've realized that printables alone aren't all you need in order to thrive as a teacher or homeschool parent. That's why I also created this show and got certified as a life coach to help you finally kick burnout to the curb and feel confident with whatever challenges come your way. With the right mindset strategies and new teaching inspiration, you're going to be well on your way to your best teacher life. Now let's go. We are back with weekly content on Wife Teacher Mommy, the podcast. And I'm really excited about this. I'm excited that we're getting the episodes out on YouTube so you can watch them if that's what you prefer to do. Of course, they'll be airing on Apple and Spotify or just the show notes page on wifeteachermommy.com if that's where you prefer to listen. Nothing is changing, but we are adding YouTube as well. Super exciting. So for the last 6 weeks, we had a new episode every other week, and then we had a replay for 3 weeks each of the other weeks. Now, the reason we did this is because I had a 2-week trip that I was going on, and I had a book deadline. So just to make sure that I could make that deadline and my trip and everything, and I'll even be telling a story a little bit about that and how it applies to what we're talking about today. But in order to do that, I needed to give myself a little more time. So we did some replays, and I honestly think it was perfect timing because for back to school, that interview with Kimberly Locke, I looked and it aired over a year ago, and it was one of our top episodes. And I'm like, you know what? All the teachers out there, they probably want to hear about flexible seating right now. So we pulled that episode and re-aired it. We took another one. We had a lot of people ask when I was like, what topics do you want to hear about on the podcast? We had quite a few responses saying, I want to learn how to balance work, life, and mom. All the things, like how to balance it. And I'm like, you know what? We have an episode all about that. We've had some awesome new content come out as well. We talked about, and they were requested topics, like being around kids all the time. I did an episode about that. Applies to the homeschool mamas and the teachers who listen. We had one all about stop comparing yourself to other teachers or other homeschool parents. I feel like that is very applicable. So we've just made sure to tailor this content to exactly what you need. So if there's something that you want to hear about that I haven't done an episode about yet, be sure to email me at hello@wifeteachermommy.com. The team will get it to me or DM us on Instagram at Wife Teacher Mommy. I would love to hear exactly what you would want to hear about on the podcast as I'm planning future episodes. So would love to hear from you as always. But I'm actually really excited because now we are back to having a new episode every week. I hit my book deadline and I am ready to rock and roll with some new content. I actually got really inspired through that writing and through that vacation for lots of new topics to talk about. And we have some really exciting interviews coming up as well. So you'll want to make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the upcoming episodes. Okay, so on the podcast in general, we talk a lot about our mindset. We talk about the 5-step framework, the self-coaching model that I certified in with my certification through the Life Coach School, which basically talks about how our thoughts create our feelings, drive our actions and results. We've gotten really clear on the difference between what our circumstances are and what our thoughts are. So if you're listening for the first time, actually, I want to review for those. Maybe you're just tuning in now. So I want to make sure you get up to speed on what we talk about here. Our circumstances are like the facts of what is going on, and our thoughts are the meaning that we add behind them. I want to make sure that I explain in a way that everybody understands. So our thoughts do drive our feelings, but our thoughts don't come from nowhere. There's the context behind our thoughts. We all have been raised in a certain way. We have a certain perspective. We have our own experiences. We have thought patterns and beliefs that are programmed into us. So those impact our thoughts, and there's nothing wrong with this. In fact, that's what our brains are doing. They're using the information they have to help us comprehend what is going on around us. So I just want to make that really clear. And then there are also times that we want to look at our feelings before we even start thought work. So if you have tried at any point to use the model to look at your thoughts and how it drives your feelings, actions, and results, and you're just having a hard time with it, there's a chance that maybe you need to look at your feelings first and process through those emotions. I've talked about that on the episode I did about Sunday Scaries, if you want to review that content. We'll also be talking about that a lot in our November episode lineup, which I'm really excited about. Basically, the one thing we want to know is if we are activated, if you're super anxious or super depressed, you either really high or really low, then thought work is probably not what you want to do. When we want to look at our thoughts is when we're feeling kind of in more of a normal state. So just want to make that really clear before we dive into the next couple episodes, which really are geared on our thoughts. And again, like I always say, our thoughts are so important, but I just want to make sure that we are doing this from a healthy place. It's learning awareness about how our thoughts and seeing what's going on. That is where the beauty of thought work comes into play. We don't do thought work to just immediately try to fix the problem. We want to just get awareness about, hey, this is what's going on for me. Isn't this interesting? We're getting to know ourselves and have so much grace for ourselves, get to know who we really are, the beauty behind our thoughts and the core values and beliefs and experiences that have led us to be who we are today. It works best if we can simply observe and watch what is going on as we are learning this concept. But then a lot of you who've been listening have been doing this. There are times we'll realize that those thoughts we're having aren't serving us. And that once we get that self-awareness, okay, I'm thinking this, it's causing this. I actually don't want it to do that. And there are times that happens. And that is when we do want to work on changing our thought patterns and our beliefs. And that is where understanding cognitive distortions comes into play. So that is what we're talking about today. Today, we're talking about two different types of cognitive distortions, which are all or nothing thinking and overgeneralization. And I've been diving even more into cognitive distortions as I've been writing my book. I've been really kind of fascinated by this whole topic. I've been diving into tons of research as I've been working on this book. And I did a whole section on cognitive distortions. I'm really excited about it. I'm actually going to be teaching a workshop about this to Wife Teacher Mommy Club members on November 1st. So if you're a member, mark your calendar for November 1st. We're going to be talking all about this. So if you're in the club, be sure to add that to your calendar. Or if you're listening after November 1st, the replay will be on the Members Only Private Podcast and in your member dashboard. But for everybody here today, I will be teaching you two of those cognitive distortions right here on the podcast today. But first, you're probably like, okay, Kelsey, you keep saying cognitive distortions. What does that mean? Don't worry, I'm going to break it down for you right now. So according to the Cambridge Dictionary, the term cognitive means relating to or involving the processes of reasoning. So that is cognitive, like from the brain, our reasoning. And distortions mean a change to the intended or true meaning of something. So therefore, cognitive distortions are irrational or biased thinking patterns that lead to negative emotions and behavior. So it's when we're kind of thinking something that isn't exactly true. So cognitive, like in the brain, distortions, not exactly how it really is. Kind of like you're looking in one of those like wavy mirrors, you know, where think you're looking at what's right, but it's just not quite right. And these concepts, they're not attributed to any one person. They have been developed and refined over time within the field of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is really the self-coaching model we use is based off of cognitive behavioral therapy and psychology. So when we learn about cognitive distortions, it can help us more easily identify our unintentional models. So the ways that we're thinking and how it's causing our feelings, actions, and results that we don't realize that are just happening on their own. And we all do this. I just say nearly every single day we can find ourselves in some sort of cognitive distortion kind of thinking. And there's nothing wrong with this, like I said, but it's when we can get that awareness and be like, oh, wait, I realize I'm doing this. And as I explain these to you, you'll probably recognize, oh yeah, I totally know what this is because I know that I've done it or I've seen other people do it. Sometimes we tend to be like, oh yeah, I've seen this person needs to listen to this podcast. If you're thinking that, I mean, I've done that too, but also like you might think somebody else needs to hear this, but the chance is that we need to hear it too because we all do these things. It is human nature. Okay. So first, let's talk about all or nothing thinking. So this is when we see things in an extreme, like black or white mindset with no sort of middle ground. It's just like everything is all this way or all that way. Everything is in absolutes. So, and these absolutes we're making up in our minds, and so it must be this way or not at all. There's no in between. And often we use this against ourselves when we think we must either be a complete success or we're a total failure. Like there's nothing in between there. And it can apply to other areas of life too, such as thinking a person, a group, or an organization, a group of people is all bad or all good without being able to see any sort of shades of gray. So this is often also called like black and white thinking. So it's like everything's all bad or all good. And all or nothing thinking can make us feel crummy a good portion of the time because life is rarely all positive or all negative. So if it has to be all one or the other and there is some negative, well, then just say it's all negative, which isn't usually true. Okay, so let's go over some examples for all or nothing thinking. Kind of will help us understand it a little bit better. So one example might be if you're a teacher and you want to do the best you can in your career, you have all this list of all the professional developments that you want to do. And you attend to some of them, but some of them you aren't able to make it for whatever reason. And you assume you must be falling behind in your career because you weren't doing all the trainings you wanted to do. That would be an example of all or nothing thinking because you've done some, you just didn't do all of it. So it's nothing, right? All or nothing. Another one might be that you believe that unless your students score perfectly on every test, that you are an ineffective teacher. So it's like, again, they have to do well on everything or it's completely discounted. A parent might feel the same way, might have a similar experience. Like if your kiddo is struggling with reading, we might be like, oh no, oh my goodness, I just can't teach my kid how to read. I just don't know what I'm doing. I'm a terrible teacher. So another example would be if you have a terrible day of teaching or parenting or both. It just doesn't go as planned. You think your whole approach, your whole schedule, everything you're trying to do must just be terrible and you need to throw it out the window. So all of those are examples of all or nothing thinking. Another example, it doesn't always have to apply to you personally. It could be that there are maybe some things, like maybe some policies you don't agree with at, let's say, like your school, and maybe some people you don't get along with as well. You don't like how they think, you don't like what they do, you don't like how they teach or whatever. And it's just a bad school because not everything is going exactly how you want it. That is another example of all or nothing thinking, because all or nothing thinking can help us miss like the nuance and beauty of ourselves and people in workplaces and organizations in which we are involved. Those are some examples of all or nothing thinking. Now, the next one we're going to talk about is overgeneralization. Now, there are some similarities between all or nothing thinking and overgeneralization. So I'm going to go over overgeneralization, and then we'll talk a little bit about the similarities and differences between the two. So this thinking pattern happens when we draw broad negative conclusions from one isolated incident or event and apply it to everything. So the big clue that lets us know we're overgeneralizing would be when we use words like always, never, everything, and nothing. It can easily be identified through global labels such as, oh, these are such lazy students, or they're such a bad mom, or, oh, I'm such a terrible person, things like that. So one example of this would be if you have a friend who is running a bit late to meet you for lunch. You might think, why is everyone always late? Maybe you've had like an experience where another friend was late recently. You think, why is everyone always late? But the truth is, everyone isn't always late, right? Or even this person, like, she is always late. Has she absolutely never been on time? So we can just know that if we say always or never, it's usually not true. Notice how I say usually. I didn't say always or never, right? Another example might be after one play date goes poorly, a parent believes that all play groups are chaotic and unstructured. Like, oh, that was terrible. I'm never going to try a play group ever again. That's another example. So simply put, drawing a broad negative conclusion about yourself and your surroundings based on just a couple or even a single experience is a result of overgeneralization. So I want to tell you a little story too about overgeneralizing. So like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, I recently went on that 2-week trip. It was great. It was the first week was for a professional development for me as a business owner. And then we extended it a week for some family time. But I also had a book deadline. I had my first deadline for Teacher Goals Publishing for the book that I'm writing. I mean, for all of you, I'm so excited about this book, honestly. And because we were on this trip, we had this extra week, and my deadline was at the end of that second week, and I wasn't completely done. And that's just a result of lots of things that have been going on in my company and my life and everything. And I just hadn't intentionally planned as much time to write because I figured I could just do it closer to the deadline. And I could. And so I did. It was going exactly according to what I planned. We just happened to also decide to extend that trip. So I'm like, okay, I'll just write on the trip. It'll be totally fine. For the most part, it was. I actually love traveling because it sparks inspiration. I'm kind of not in the day-to-day of the work that I do. I was able to just, really feel the flow of writing. So the majority of the time I was really, really happy with it. But there was one moment where my family was in the other room playing games and I was, in the bedroom writing. And I was just thinking why do I always put things off? That is what I told myself. And the funny thing about this is I realized I was writing the section about cognitive distortions. I had just maybe 20 minutes before written about overgeneralization and using the words always and never being a sign of using the cognitive distortion of overgeneralization. And I caught that. I was like, why do I always put things off? And the truth is I don't. I usually don't put things off. And so that was just an example of an overgeneralization. Why do I always do this? Why do I always put things off? And I don't, but it was just that cognitive distortion of what I was telling myself in that moment. And I had so much grace for myself. I was like, oh, isn't that interesting? I kind of laughed about it. And I was like, where do I think that thought is coming from? And just, kind of got curious about that and everything. But I realized that I was in that overgeneralization. And because I knew that, I was able to identify it. If I hadn't have had awareness of that cognitive distortion, I might not have recognized it as easily. But now I know the words always, never, everything, nothing. A lot of times those are signs that we are thinking in distorted ways. So super fascinating. Okay, so let's talk about some similarities and differences between the two types. Both cognitive distortions, they have a tendency to think in those extreme, absolute terms, which lead to overly negative and unrealistic conclusions. But for all or nothing thinking, it reflects the tendency to view situations as either entirely positive or negative with no middle ground, a polarized way of looking at everything. Overgeneralization is just making a sweeping conclusion based on limited incidents. So all or nothing is kind of there are these two extremes, where overgeneralization is just taking something and applying it to more than everything. So that is kind of the similarities between the two, but there are also some differences. So the first difference would be kind of the scope of the application. So this is the key difference. So all or nothing thinking pertains to the way we perceive the overall quality or something, like perfect or failure. Again, there's those two absolutes, where overgeneralization is just generalizations we make over isolated incidents. Also, the degree of extremeness, all or nothing thinking is usually a bit more extreme and polarized because of those two opposites, like perfect versus failure, where overgeneralization is generally still negative, but it's more of drawing a broad conclusion, sweeping conclusion that don't necessarily have to be those polar opposites. And they can both lead to perfectionism, but all or nothing thinking generally does a lot more because we feel like we must achieve perfection in all areas because it's all or nothing. Overgeneralization can involve perfectionism, but it doesn't necessarily. It's more the misapplication of experiences in a broader context than we should apply it. And then the final thing is that all or nothing thinking is more focused on the overall quality of something, where overgeneralization is more focused on the implications of something that has happened. So those are the first two cognitive distortions that we are going over on the podcast: overgeneralization and all or nothing thinking. Now, what do we do when we find ourselves doing either of these things? First, we give ourselves tons of grace. Like I mentioned that I did when I caught myself thinking that about myself when I was writing my book just last week. We give ourselves grace, we notice it. Like, we get proud of ourselves for noticing it in the first place because, we've gone so much of our lives not noticing when we're doing it. So we celebrate, give ourselves grace, and then we can just be like, I wonder, why was I thinking that? And how was I feeling? We can kind of do some models. We can kind of get curious about what is going on and just kind of have that awareness of it. So maybe next time you might be like, oh, wait, no, that is overgeneralization, or that is all or nothing thinking. This doesn't have to be all good or all bad. So let's recap a little bit. At the beginning, we talked about the model, about how our thoughts create our feelings, how thought work is such a powerful way for us to gain awareness about what is going on around us. We talked about that the first step with it is awareness. We're not necessarily trying to change ourselves, but when we notice these things and if we realize it's not serving us, like a lot of these cognitive distortions are, this can be a way to identify the thoughts that maybe we will want to change. And the other thing we briefly mentioned is that if your really heightened emotions, high or low, you might want to focus on processing your feelings first. So I have some other episodes I would recommend for that. You could start with the Sunday Scaries one. We have even more coming out in the coming weeks about that. We also talked about what cognitive distortions are. So it's basically when you're thinking in ways that aren't quite right. Cognitive in the brain, distortions, like, it's distorted. It's like you're looking in one of those wavy mirrors. We talked about all or nothing thinking, which is when we take something and it has to be all good or all bad. There's no in between. We talked about overgeneralization, where we take something from just one isolated incident or a few isolated incidents and apply it to everything. And we talked about what we do when we find ourselves doing either of these things. We just celebrate that we even noticed it, give ourselves a lot of grace, get curious about it, and what I didn't mention before, but if we want to, we can make some changes using the model and thought work and bridge thoughts, ladder thoughts, like what do I want to think instead, create intentional models, all the things that we generally talk about on this podcast and inside Wife Teacher Mommy Club. So again, if you are a member of Wife Teacher Mommy Club, be sure to attend the call on November 1st. If you're listening to this before then, November 1st, 2023, where we're going to go over all of the cognitive distortions that I've been researching. We just went over 2 of them today. It's going to be a great time. If you're not a member yet, you can totally join us. We're decided to leave the doors open right now because I don't want to prevent anybody from getting this coaching support that I would love for you to have. So you can go to wifeteachermommy.com and join us, or the link in the show notes to learn more about the club. Now, stay tuned because next week we're going to be talking all about another cognitive distortion called jumping to conclusions. So we will talk then. Thank you for listening to Wife Teacher Mommy, the podcast. If you enjoyed our time together, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you're ready to take the next step, I'd love for you to join me face-to-face of my next free virtual mindset masterclass. In this masterclass, I'll share my full story of how it transformed my teacher overwhelm and anxiety into balance, authenticity, and a true understanding of myself. And the best news, it'll work for you too. I'll break down my 5-step framework, share inspiring stories that will help shift your mindset, and you'll even get to see life coaching in action. You'll get a free resource and a special opportunity just for joining us, and you won't be able to get this anywhere else. Did I mention this masterclass is free? You've got nothing to lose. All you need to do is sign up, add it to your calendar, and commit to showing up live. Go to wifeteachermommy.com/masterclass to sign up or head to the link in the show notes. I will see you at the masterclass.